بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. نويت التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم ودعاء إلى الهدى ودلالة على الخير ابتغاء وجه الله مرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى. Alhamdulillah. So yesterday we spoke about the battle of Khandaq where the Banu Nadir had planned and made alliances with the Quraysh, and they came to attack the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then we spoke about the Banu Qurayza, who also went in with this agreement. Yesterday we spoke about this. The Banu Qurayza went into this agreement, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam then goes out to war against them after the Battle of the Trench, and he lays siege there. So now the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because the Banu Qurayza had broken their agreement, the Banu Nadir who broke the agreement and then were expelled, and then went to the Quraysh and came back to attack Medina with the Quraysh and with the other tribes, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam now goes out to fight them. And this is in the 7th year after Hijrah, and we see that the Banu Nadir, they had settled in a place called Khaybar, and they had made alliances and allies in that region. And so the Prophet ﷺ knows that if he leaves them be, that they will get stronger and that they can attack Medina. So the Prophet ﷺ goes out to attack them first, and Khaybar is about 100 miles north of Medina. So the Prophet ﷺ, he sets out with not a huge number of men, only 1,400 men go out with him ﷺ, because a huge army wasn't needed. And so he goes out to Khaybar, and when he arrives there, just on the outskirts of Khaybar, he sets up camp, and he waits the night to see if he will hear the adhan. And that if he hears the adhan, then he wouldn't attack, because it would mean that they have accepted Islam and they've repented and they would have amended their ways. And so he doesn't hear the adhan sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and so he decides that to attack the Banu Nadir. And so by the time the actual battle had started and they attack Khaybar itself, that the Banu Nadir had by this time, most of them, barricaded themselves into their fortresses. And so the Prophet ﷺ sends the army forward to attack the fortresses, and the army is led initially by Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq on the first day, and Sayyidina Abu Bakr tries to penetrate the fortresses, but he's unable, he's unsuccessful, and so they come back. And the next day the Prophet ﷺ sends Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab as a leader, and again they are unsuccessful. And so when they come back that night, the Prophet ﷺ says, tomorrow I shall pass my standard to a man at whose hands Allah will bring victory, and he's a man who loves Allah and his messenger. And so the Muslims, they spent this night talking to each other, saying, who could it be? I wish it, inshallah it's me, I wish it's me. And they were all wondering who this individual will be, and hoping that it would be them that the Prophet ﷺ chooses. So the next morning comes, and the Prophet ﷺ, he calls for Ali karamallahu wajhu. He says, where is Ali? And they tell the Prophet ﷺ that he injured his eye, and so he's not there. And so the Prophet ﷺ calls for him, and then he takes his saliva and wipes his saliva in the eye, spits in the eye of Sayyidina Ali karamallahu wajhu, and Ali says that his eye is cured, and that eye was better than his other eye after that. And so then Sayyidina Ali is given the banner, and he leads the army into Khaybar, and Sayyidina Ali penetrates all the fortresses except 2 of them, and the people barricade themselves into these 2 fortresses, and finally that they are surrounded by the Muslims, and the Muslims lay siege upon these fortresses. And so they realize that they won't survive, and that the only way is to surrender. And so we see here when Sayyidina Ali karamallahu wajhu at this battle, he shows again his leadership skills, and he also shows his strength and leading by example, radiallahu ta'ala anhu. That it's mentioned that here at Khaybar, the famous narration about Sayyidina Ali, that he took the door of the fortress and used it as a shield. So his own shield broke, and he took the door of the fortress and he used that as a shield. Imagine this huge door, and this man using it as a shield. And in one narration it's mentioned that after the battle 8 Sahaba came to pick it up and were not able to, and then another that 40 companions came and they tried to pick it up and they weren't able. So this shows the incredible strength of Ali bin Abi Talib radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And this strength was not only a physical strength, but as we can see, 40 people trying to pick up a door, that's not only physical strength, this is another type of strength as well. This is spiritual strength, and the strength that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him at that moment. And so now we see that an agreement is made, and they agree that to take care of the land there at Khaybar, and the land now belongs to the Muslims, but they would take half of the proceeds. So the proceeds are shared amongst them, and there will be peace amongst them, with the condition that the Banu Nadir can be expelled at any time. And so once this agreement's made, one of the women from the Banu Nadir, she comes forward, Zainab bint al-Harith, and she presents to the Prophet ﷺ a dish, a meat dish, a roasted goat. And so she had asked around that what is the favourite food, what is the favourite dish of the Prophet ﷺ, and she was told that meat. And so she said, which part of the meat? And she was told that he prefers the leg. And so she poisoned the whole animal, and she put extra poison into the leg, so that when the Prophet ﷺ eats it, that she would poison him and kill him. So the dish is brought in front of the Prophet ﷺ, and he takes a bite, and soon as he takes a bite, he spits it out ﷺ. But one of the companions who was eating with him, Bishr ibn al-Bara, he takes a bite and he swallows it, and he dies there, radiallahu ta'ala anhu. The poison takes over and he dies. But the Prophet ﷺ, upon taking the bite and he spat it out, and he said, this bone has been, tells me it's poisoned. And so he said, who cooked the food, who's brought the food? And they told her it's this Zainab. And so she's brought in front of the Prophet ﷺ, and she says, I wanted to see if you were merely a king. If you were, I would have got rid of you. Or to see if you were a prophet, because if you were a prophet, then you would know that it has been poisoned. And so the Prophet ﷺ hears this from Zainab, and some mention that she became Muslim, and others also, there's difference of opinion whether she was killed for her killing of Sayyidina Bishr. So this was a state of Zainab. Now we also see in this year, in the 70th year of Hijri, because we see that now the Muslims have this peace treaty and agreement with the Quraysh, that the Prophet ﷺ can go out and call people and spend most of his time calling others to Islam. Prior to this, it was a defensive phase. If you remember right at the start, where we spoke about the different phases of the Prophet ﷺ's calling. The first was where he was calling in secrecy, not open calling, and the second was where he was open calling ﷺ, and then the defensive warfare, where he was given the command to defend the religion and defend Islam through war. And so the Prophet ﷺ was allowed to fight back. And so this time the Prophet ﷺ, now he had entered into this peace agreement with the Quraysh, who were the main tribe showing enmity towards the Muslims. And so the Prophet ﷺ is no longer busy with that, and this is not taking most of his time. So he now begins to send out messengers to different areas and even further than Arabia. And so he sends out 10 messengers, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and at the same time he sends letters as well to various kings and rulers along with those messengers. And so one of the companions, he comes to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, Ya Rasulullah, I've dealt with kings and the like, and that when we send a letter, a message, that they won't give it any time, they won't read it unless it's been stamped. So the Prophet ﷺ says, that's fine. And they say, well, then we'll make you a stamp. And so a stamp was made for him to seal and stamp the letters, and that said Muhammad Rasulullah. And so we've seen that most of us may have seen an image of the stamp where the name of Allah is at the top. It says Allah, so Muhammad at the bottom, Muhammad Rasul Allah, Muhammad the messenger of Allah. But through we see the adab of the Prophet ﷺ placing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's name at the top and his own name underneath. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he also sends out one day in Muharram, he sends out 6 men to different areas who spoke the language of the people. So he sends out Amr ibn Umayyah to the emperor of Abyssinia, and the emperor there he takes the letter and he places it on his eyes, and he sits humbly onto the floor, and then he says the Shahada with Amr, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah. He says, if I were able to come and see him, I would do so, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so he accepts Islam. Another messenger was sent. Dihya al-Kalbi was sent to Heraclius, the emperor of Byzantium, and the letter was delivered to the ruler of Basra, and he passed it on to Heraclius. And so when Heraclius receives this letter, he initially accepts, and he sees that this is the truth, that Muhammad is the messenger of God. And so he calls his ministers, and he calls all his ministers, because he takes a letter to the rabbis and the like, and they tell him that this is a prophet that is mentioned in our text, to the Christian monks, and they tell him that this is a prophet that's mentioned in our text, and this must be him. And so he accepts, and he calls his ministers, and he tells them that this is what letter I've received from this Muhammad bin Abdullah, and this is what he's saying. And so they immediately get angry and say, how can we accept this, and this is how can we leave the religion of our forefathers and the like. And when he hears this and he sees their anger, Heraclius becomes afraid that they will set upon him and that he will lose his kingdom. So he says to them, I was only testing you. It was only a test to see if you will accept and you will leave the religion of your forefathers. But you've passed that test. So he doesn't accept Islam, Heraclius, through his fear of losing his kingdom and his love of this dunya. So another messenger was sent, Abdullah ibn Hudhafa was sent to the king of Persia, and when he read the letter of the Prophet ﷺ, he tore up this letter. And so when the Prophet ﷺ heard that this is what he had done to the letter, this was his reaction, the Prophet ﷺ said, may Allah tear his kingdom into pieces. And that's what we see, that's what happened with Persia, that it was torn into pieces. And that the king of Persia then he sends a letter to Badhan, who's the governor he had appointed over Yemen, saying to him that send two strong men to this man, to Muhammad, and have them bring him to me. And so when Badhan he receives this letter, he then sends a letter to the Prophet ﷺ with these 2 men, and the Prophet ﷺ receives the letter and he reads it, and he smiles ﷺ, and he says to him, to these 2 men, he says, take your leave of me today, rest, and come back to me tomorrow, and I will tell you what I intend to do. So these 2 men go and they take a rest. They come back the next day, and so the Prophet ﷺ then tells them, he says, tell your friend, this is Badhan, inform your friend that 7 hours ago on this night, my Lord killed his Lord. My Lord Allah killed his Lord, the king of Persia, and Allah has given his power to his son Shihrawayh. His son is now given power. So over this course of this one night, that the Prophet ﷺ, it's impossible that he would have received this news other than it being revelation or Allah revealing it to him. And so these 2 men, when they hear this, they return immediately to Badhan, and they inform him that this is what happened, and they and Badhan enter into Islam, and his children, his sons also enter into Islam. Then the Prophet ﷺ, he sent Harith ibn Umayr to the Byzantium governor Shuhrabil ibn Amr, and Shuhrabil ibn Amr, he bound Harith, took him prisoner, and he killed him, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. And so many messengers were sent out during this time to the different areas, and many accepted Islam, many refused, many didn't accept the calling, and we see how different kings and different emperors reacted in different ways, with some accepting, some refusing, some killing the messengers that were sent. But many people came to the Prophet ﷺ themselves after receiving these letters and these messages and hearing about him. They came to Medina themselves and accepted Islam. So we saw slowly, but much quicker than before, Islam was growing, and the number of Muslims was growing. So during this time also, from Mecca, we see that Amr bin As, he sets out from Mecca to head towards Medina to accept and declare his Islam. And on the way, when he's going, he sees Khalid bin Walid going in the same direction. So he says, where are you going? And he says, I'm actually on my way to declare declare Islam. And so Sayyidina Khalid says, what? I'm the same. I'm on the way to declare myself as a Muslim. And Sayyidina Khalid says, after all, how long shall we continue as we have been doing? And so Amr, he says, I've come to do the same, to declare my Islam. So they both go together and they come before the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And when they stand before him, Sayyidina Khalid declares his Islam first, and he takes the Shahada with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Medina, and then Amr follows suit and does the same. So in this year, also in the 7th year Hijrah, we see that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, now in Dhul Qa'dah, he sets out for Umrah again, and this time with 2,000 men and women, 1,400 that were with him the previous year. And we remember that they stopped and they didn't enter into Mecca, rather that they sacrificed and shaved their hair and exited out of Ihram. So those 1,400 went on the Umrah this year, but altogether there was 2,000. And it says that not one stayed back from those 1,400 that went the previous year. No one stayed back. All those 1,400 went, except if they had died or they were martyred at Khaybar. Otherwise, all of them went with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so the Quraysh, they received news that the Muslims were in a bad state. So the Quraysh came out to see the Muslims entering into Mecca, to see, are they in a bad state? They see them because they had heard these rumors that the Muslims are not in a good state, and so they wanted to see how the Muslims were. So when the Muslims came, the Quraysh came out to see them. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he enters into Mecca, and he says to his companions sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because he knows now the Quraysh will be watching, so he says that may Allah's mercy be today upon whoever shows them his strength, that don't show the Quraysh your strength. And so this is why when they began to do the tawaf, that we see that they did the first 3 circuits at a faster pace, to show that we're not tired. We've come this whole journey from Medina, we've come to do pilgrimage, and yet we still have this strength that we can do the tawaf at this faster pace. And so that set the sunnah for us, and that's how we still do it today. And so the Sahaba do the first 3 circuits at a faster pace. And it was during this time the Prophet ﷺ also married Maymuna bint al-Harith radiyallahu ta'ala anha, and it was Sayyidina Abbas bin Abdul Muttalib who gave her, as he was Maymuna's sister's husband. And so Abbas bin Abdul Muttalib gave her to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So after 3 days there in Mecca, the Quraysh now come to Sayyidina Ali karamallahu wajhu, and they say to him that, tell your friend that it's time for him to depart, it's time for him to leave Mecca, as our agreement was that you can come this following year, but stay only 3 days. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, yeah, that's what we agreed, and he leaves after 3 days sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So then he returns back to Medina, and then we see in the following year, in the 8th year of Hijrah, after Hijrah, that the Prophet ﷺ now, he sends out 3,000 men to go and fight the Byzantines in Busra, because of their killing of Harith ibn Umayr, that he had sent this messenger to them and they had killed his messenger ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ, the blood of a Muslim was sacred, and any Muslim that was killed or hurt, the Prophet ﷺ was there to defend them. And so the Prophet ﷺ now sends out an army of 3,000 men with himself, army of 3,000 men to the Byzantines in Basra. And before they left, the Prophet ﷺ didn't go on this expedition himself, and he says to the soldiers that Zayd bin Haritha will be the commander, he is the leader. But if he is killed, then Ja'far bin Abi Talib, his cousin, should be the leader, the brother of Ali. Then if Ja'far is killed, then the leader should be Abdullah ibn Rawaha, and if he is killed, then you should choose someone from amongst yourselves. So this already told the Sahaba that this is what will probably happen, this is what will happen, because the Prophet ﷺ is indicating to them that this is what will happen. And so the Muslims, when they arrive to the Byzantine borders, and the Byzantines had heard that the Muslims were coming, and they knew that the Muslims were coming to take their revenge, so Heraclius, he sends out an army of 100,000 men, and his governor Shuhrabil, he sends another 100,000 from the local tribes. So some say it was 100,000 altogether, some say it was 200,000, with the army of Heraclius and Shuhrabil being 200,000. And so the Muslims were only 3,000. And when they arrive, the Muslims hear of the great number that's before them. That's 100, 200,000 men before them, and we're only 3,000. And so they said, some of them said that we should send news to the Prophet ﷺ, tell him of the great number. This is we're only 3,000 and they're 200,000. And so Abdullah ibn Rawaha, he reminds them, and he says to them that reminds them of Allah's command, and he says that we have fought for our faith, that we fight for our faith, not because of our numbers, or not because of our numbers or human strength. That's not why we're fighting. We're fighting simply for our faith. And so he says that in either case that they will see victory. So we will either be victorious, we'll win, we will have victory on the battlefield, or we will have victory in death, that we will be martyrs. So either way, it's victory for us as Muslims. And so now the Muslims, they agree, and they begin to arrange their lines, and Zayd bin Haritha arranges the Muslims' lines, and they begin to fight. Sayyidina Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu himself leads the army, and he fights bravely until he is killed. And then Sayyidina Ja'far bin Abi Talib, he takes command, the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ and brother of Ali bin Abi Talib. And so he takes command, and he leads the army until he himself again is killed. And then Abdullah ibn Rawaha takes command, and again he fights and penetrates the army until he is killed. And so the Prophet ﷺ was sitting in Medina telling the companions what was happening whilst it was happening in here at Mu'ta. So this battle took place at Mu'ta. And so the Prophet ﷺ was telling them what was happening. When Abdullah ibn Rawaha took command, he himself, because he saw so many Muslims being killed, and two of the great Sahaba, Zayd and Ja'far, being killed, so he says, the first thing he says to himself, he says, I swear to you, O my soul, he says, you will go down to the battlefield. So he says, you will go, or I will force you to do so. Don't have doubts now. And he's talking to himself, do not have doubts now that you will go and fight, and if you don't, I will force you to go and fight. So this is what he tells to himself, and he radiallahu ta'ala anhu fights until he is killed. And then the army, the command is taken over by Sayyidina Khalid bin Walid, who brings, alhamdulillah, he's victorious. He defeats the army of the Byzantines, doesn't kill them all, doesn't mean he kills them all, but he defeats them and he brings the Muslims back to Medina. And the way he did this was that every day that he rotated the fighters that were at the back, he would bring them to the front. The fighters that were on the right flank, he would send them to the left, and the left to the right. And he would do this and rotate them. So he would rotate the right to the left to the right, and then bring the back to the front, and the front would go to the back. And he did this to make it so the Byzantine thought that the Muslims were having this continuous reinforcement was arriving from Medina. And so when the Byzantines saw this, that the Muslims were being reinforced, there was new fighters coming. Fear entered into their hearts, and they thought that we will lose huge numbers here. So they retreated. And so Sayyidina Khalid bin Walid was victorious, and he decides not to lay chase upon the Byzantines, rather return back to Medina. And he returns radiallahu ta'ala anhu with the army, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he tells his companions what is happening this whole time in that battle. And when Sayyidina Ja'far bin Abi Talib, he was killed, that they mentioned that angels came to him and they wished to take him into paradise. And he says, no, take me to see my beloved. He refuses to enter paradise because he wants to see his beloved, so they take him to Medina. And so the Prophet ﷺ calls him Ja'far at-Tayyar, that he will have wings. Ja'far, the one with wings, the one that flies. And in Jannat al-Firdaus, he will be flying with his wings. So this whole time when the battle was taking place, the Prophet ﷺ was telling the companions what was happening. And when Sayyidina Khalid returns, the Prophet ﷺ greets him, and he calls him Sayfullah, the sword of Allah. That this is the sword of Allah. And when Sayyidina Khalid bin Walid, when he was old, he didn't die on the battlefield, and he died from sickness in old age at home. And so he says, woe unto me, that only if I died on the battlefield, I was a martyr, that's the death I would have wanted. That he's given his life. This is somebody who's never lost a battle. Any battle he was involved in, he had never lost. Radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So he says, wish I had to die as a martyr. And his wife says, no, that was impossible for you, because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam called you Sayfullah, the sword of Allah, and Allah's sword never breaks. So it became impossible for you to be killed. That you cannot break the sword of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so he radiallahu ta'ala anhu died on his deathbed. And it's mentioned that when he died, he had over 60 wounds on the front of his body, from arrows and swords and the like. So 60 wounds all on the front, and not a one wound on the back, because he never showed his back to the enemy. He never fled from the battlefield, radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So we see this period of time that the Muslims, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this whole time was very much involved in defensive war and fighting against those that were showing enmity towards the Muslims and those that killed the Muslims. So the Prophet ﷺ spent this period of time. But this shouldn't make one think that people in Medina weren't living a normal life. They were still living a normal life. The Sahaba were still learning their deen. Many were becoming Muslims, so they were coming to see the Prophet ﷺ. They were learning their religion. The Prophet ﷺ was sending them out messengers, sending people to teach them Quran. At the same time, they were enjoying and having fun. The Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum, that they didn't have very much, but they still had fun. That mentions from the Sahaba that they would be sitting and they would have a fight with the watermelon left over, with the skin that was left over. They would throw it at each other and have fights. From amongst them we know Sayyidina Nu'ayman ibn Amr, that he was known to be a joker who would joke and play practical tricks on the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he would even play jokes on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And from once, that when he goes to the market and he sees some dates in the market, and so he purchases these dates from the seller with the condition that he will pay later, so he has a debt. And so he takes the dates and he gives them to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, says this is a gift, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam eats the dates. The next day, the seller comes to Nu'ayman. He says that, give me my payment for the dates you bought. He says, what payment? I didn't eat the dates. Go to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Go to the Prophet. He's the one who ate the dates. So the seller goes to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He says to the Prophet that you need to pay me for those dates. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, what do you mean that I didn't buy them. They were a gift. Nu'ayman bought them. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam calls for Nu'ayman. says, what is this, Nu'ayman? Nu'ayman says, Ya Rasulullah, you ate the dates, pay for the dates. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he laughs because he knows he's been played by Nu'ayman. And so the Prophet ﷺ has a laugh about it, and he pays the seller for the dates. And we see the Prophet ﷺ doesn't rebuke Nu'ayman because he knew this was from his nature, and rather the Prophet ﷺ found it funny. And so he then, Nu'ayman says that alhamdulillah, that I was able to benefit from that episode. Two things: that one, the Prophet ﷺ ate that he had not eaten in days, and I saw him eat, so it brought me pleasure. And the other thing that brought me pleasure was that I saw him smile, that he laughed about this. So alhamdulillah, it was all good. From another time, he radiallahu ta'ala anhu, Nu'ayman, when the Prophet ﷺ had visitors, and they tied their camel outside the house of the Prophet ﷺ, outside the masjid, and they go inside and meet the Prophet ﷺ. They have a long meeting, and when the Sahaba see the camel, they see meat. There's some meat to eat, and so they call Nu'ayman and they say, go and kill the animal, sacrifice it. And Nu'ayman goes and sacrifices the animal, and they cook it and they eat it. When the seller comes out of the masjid and he comes and he sees that his camel's disappeared, he begins to scream and shout, where's my camel? Who's taken my camel? And the Prophet ﷺ comes out. He says, what is this commotion? They tell him that Nu'ayman has taken the camel, sacrificed it, and they've eaten it. And so the Prophet ﷺ says, where's Nu'ayman? And so they say that he's gone to that way into so and so's garden. There's a Sahaba who had a large garden where he would grow things. And so they go there. The Prophet ﷺ goes himself, and he enters into the garden, and he says to the keeper, the owner, where is Nu'ayman? The owner knows he's seen Nu'ayman, and Nu'ayman has gone into a ditch and where there's bushes and there's all mud and dirt, and he's hid in this ditch. And so the owner, he says, I don't know, Ya Rasulullah. And he's saying it out loud, I don't know where he is, but then at the same time pointing where he is to show the Prophet ﷺ he's there, but not to alert Nu'ayman, so he flees again. So he points to the Prophet ﷺ, he's there, but he says out loud, I don't know, Ya Rasulullah. And so the Prophet ﷺ goes and he finds Nu'ayman in this ditch, and he brings him out, and the Prophet ﷺ is laughing, and he wipes him down and pats him down and brushes the dirt and dust and the bushes off him, radiallahu ta'ala anhu. But the Prophet ﷺ finds it amusing. And so another time we see where he, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, this is after the Prophet ﷺ passed away, that Nu'ayman, he's in the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ, and an old man comes in, and he's in the masjid, and he wants to, he's a blind man, and he wants to go and urinate. So he says, can somebody go take me outside of the masjid so I can go and relieve myself? And Nu'ayman takes him, but he doesn't take him outside the masjid, he takes him to a corner of the masjid. He says, you can do it here. And the old man thinks he's outside the masjid, and so the old man begins to urinate. When the Sahaba see this, they scream and shout, what are you doing? You're in the masjid. And so the old man's now, he's angry, and he says, who made me do this? Who brought me? And they tell him it was Nu'ayman. He's played a joke on you, he's played a trick on you. And so the old man says, next time you see him, show me him, that take me to him, that I can beat him with my stick. So a few days later, Nu'ayman's in the masjid, the old man comes in, this blind man, and Nu'ayman sees him, so he goes up to him, and he changes his voice, and he puts on a voice, and he says, are you looking for Nu'ayman? And the old man says, yes, where is he? And he says, I'll take you to him. So he takes him to Uthman ibn Affan, who's the Khalifa, who's the leader of the Muslims, and he's praying his salah in the masjid. He takes him to him, and Nu'ayman says, this is him. So the old man begins to beat Sayyidina Uthman, the leader, Amirul Mu'mineen, the leader of the Muslims, with his stick. And the Sahaba come, they say, what are you doing? What are you doing? This is the leader of the Muslims, and he's in salah, you're beating him with a stick. And the old man knows, okay, he's been played again. And he says, let me get hold of that Nu'ayman. And Nu'ayman flees again. They say that he continued to be like this, Nu'ayman, and just Sayyidina Uthman found that funny. Just as the Prophet ﷺ found it funny, here Nu'ayman, Sayyidina Uthman was the one that was the victim of his practical joke. And so Sayyidina Uthman himself finds it funny, and he doesn't rebuke him. And they say that he continued to be like this, Nu'ayman, until the Khilafah of Sayyidina Ali, and later until he saw the fitna started. and the Muslims started to fight amongst themselves, and that's when he stopped, because it took over him that he no longer was able to amuse others, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, because he was affected by the fitna that was being caused, radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So we see that the Muslims carried on living a normal life just as anyone would, and the city of Medina was a normal city, but it was a normal city, but not like other cities, in that it had the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam present there. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Inshallah, tomorrow we will look at Fath al-Makkah, when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam finally returns to Makkah. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ya Rabbana atarafna bi annana iqtarafna wa annana asrafna ala ladha ashrafna fatub alayna tawbata waghfir li kulli hawba wastunun al-urati wa amirati واغفر لوالدينا ربي ومولودينا وأهلي والإخوان وسائر الخلان وكل ذي محبة وجيرة وصحبة والمسلمين أجمع آمين. ربي اسمع فضلا مجودا منا لا باكتساب منا بالمصطفى رسولي نحظى بكل سولي بالمصطفى رسولي نحظى بكل سولي بالمصطفى رسولي نحظى بكل سولي وصلى وسلم ربي عليه عد الهب وآله وصحبه إدادة تشي صحبي والحمد لله في البدء وتناهي سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. في كل لحظة أبدا عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه ومداد كلماته. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله وصحبه. الفاتحة.